Okay, guys, here we go. Now, this article is going to talk about, as you see, it's from Iranian Journal of Public Health, from Tehran University of Medical Studies. Okay. Now, this is a medical studies, and as you see, this article is by the ncbi.nlm.nih.gov, and there's a lot of things on there that they publish that's about different type of things, such as different diseases and pathogens and stuff like that. Okay, so anyways, it says a brief history of human blood groups. It says abstract. The evolution of human blood groups without doubt has a history as old as man himself. There are at least 3 hypotheses about the emergence and mutation of human blood groups. Global distribution pattern and blood groups depends on various environmental factors such as disease, climate, altitude, humidity. It says, but the main blood groups are A, B, O, and RH, along with some minor groups are presented. Several investigations of blood groups from Iran. It says minor groups such as Duffy, Lutheran, Kel, KP, Kid, and XG has been reviewed, which I never heard of those before. It says it was not until the year 1900 when Karl Landsteiner at the University of Vienna discovered why some blood transfusions were successful while others could be deadly. Landsteiner discovered the ABO blood group system by mixing the red cells and serum of each of his staff. He demonstrated that the serum of some people agglutinated the red cells all of other. From these early experiments, he identified 3 types, A, B, and C. C was later to be renamed O for the German ohne, meaning without or zero, null in English. The 4th less frequent blood group, AB, was discovered a year later. In 1930, Landsteiner received the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine for his work. The gene that determines human ABO blood type is located on chromosome 9. It says 9q34.1 and is called ABO, glycosyltransferase. The ABO locus has the 3 main allelic form A, B, and O as mentioned above, and each of them is responsible for the production of glycoprotein. It is therefore the combination of alleles that are inherited from parents that determines which glycoproteins or antigens are found on a person's blood cells, and therefore ABO blood type. Genesis and evolution. As investigations have determined on monkeys, human blood groups are very old genetic indicators, which have evolved during several million years. Based on the primary racist hypothesis. So hypothesis, as we know, means educated guess. It says it was thought that in the 3 major races of man, blood groups A, Europe, B, Asian, and finally O in South America. Okay, so this is where they're telling you where these blood types are usually from. So A is usually considered as European, B as Asian, and then O, South American. Now you have to think to yourself, okay, where would the African, where would they fit in this whole scenario? That they used to call Africa Asia Sore before they called it Africa or Alkebulan. So So I'm thinking that more than likely African people, they're probably a part of the Asian, or considered as Asiatic people, I guess. So anyway, it says finally O in South America have been emerged, and gradually due to the migration and mixing of the races became the present situation. But we know that in each continent, the isolated populations are seen that have completely different blood groups. For example, there is relatively high prevalence of O blood group in Siberian inhabitants. Also, the blood group is very common in some areas of Switzerland. Now, what we know is when it comes to the people of the Americas, we know that they brought a lot of us Indians to Europe, so that would make a lot of sense on why in Switzerland, why there would be a lot of people who probably have the O type blood. And then as far as what they're talking about, the O in Siberian inhabitants, well, that's probably because they mixed in with the people that was already here on the landmass that migrated probably from South America. But anyway, it says according to another hypothesis, the emergence of all blood groups A and B and their subgroups are resulted from successive mutations from a basic and common blood group, which is the O group, and have been branched over millions of years. It says based on this theory, the old races, and see now look at that, they said old races, okay, have the old blood type. Now they didn't say young races, they said old, such as red Indians of South America. Now we know when they say red Indians, they're referring to who? Copper-colored people. Redskins. And red is another way of saying, we know red is brown. That's what they mean. Reddish brown people. And we know that the so-called Negro, so-called African American, they have a red complexion, a copper-colored complexion. It says in Eskimos that among them the frequency of O blood group is between 75 to 100%, while in most recent ethnic groups, A and B blood groups are dominant. Now, let me say that again. While in most of the recent ethnic groups, A and B blood groups are dominant. So what they're saying is that this is something that those blood types A and B are not as old as O, and that O is old. It's very old, it's very ancient, okay? And they're saying that it had evolved in South America with the Red Indian, okay? So that shows you right there that if Africa was the oldest continent, and if that was where all of civilization had started or began, then why isn't it that that place is not where old blood is found, but instead you happen to see A and B instead throughout Africa, covering Africa mostly and mainly. You don't even see O. Okay, so we gotta think about that. Okay, we have to look at those type of things because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. We have to use our critical thinking skills here, because if it was true that people migrated out of Africa, if that theory was true, which it isn't, then Africa should have been covered with O. That most of the tribes you would think would have had the O blood type instead of A and B, but it's not like that. And they're telling you right here that A and B are younger blood types that mutated from O. So anyway, it says in another hypothesis, it says the first blood group had been AB blood group, which gradually and over time, due to genetic mutations, resulted in A, B, and finally O blood groups. Based on this theory, perhaps a few million years ago, all people have had O blood type only, which is more resistant against many infectious diseases. Okay, now I'm going to leave that right there. Now, why is that important? Because throughout the Americas, you find the O blood type is very plentiful in certain areas of South America, North America, and as they stated, amongst the Eskimo. Even though they consider the Eskimo as being Asiatic or Mongoloid, they still have the O blood type. Now you have to think to yourself, they had to have Aboriginal blood in them. They had to have mixed in with the Aboriginal people, the Red Indian, in order for them to have that blood type. And they just stated that O is the oldest blood type and that the Red Indian is basically where it comes from and that it is the old race. So therefore, this is not the new world, this is the old world. And that this proves that people could not have migrated out of Africa if the Red Indians have the oldest blood type, which is universal blood. Oh, it's universal. And this also would explain the reason why a lot of so-called African Americans or Negroes are kidnapped. They're kidnapping American Indians, aka African Americans, aka American Negroes, because of the ancient blood type that they have, and they know the truth about the so-called African American, which is that they are indeed the Red Indian. And then I'm going to show you another article that talk about this next. Okay, it says distribution of blood types. Blood provides an ideal opportunity for the study of human variation without cultural prejudice. It can be easily classified for many different genetically inherited blood typing systems. Also significant is the fact that we rarely take blood types into consideration in selecting mates. In addition, few people know their own blood type today, and no one did prior to 1900. As a result, differences in blood type frequencies around the world are most likely due to other factors than social discrimination. Contemporary Japan is somewhat of an exception since there are popular Japanese stereotypes about people with different blood types. This could affect choice in marriage partners for some in Japan. For the Japanese, it says all human populations share the same 29 known blood systems, although they differ in frequencies amongst specific types. And it says, given the evolutionary closeness of apes and monkeys to our species, it is not surprising that some of them share a number of blood typing systems with us as well. Now, skipping down, it says ABO blood type systems. We have learned a good deal about how common each of the ABO blood types is around the world. Okay, so then now, as I'm skipping down, it says this can be seen with the global frequency patterns of the type of B blood allele. Note that it is highest in Central Asia. B is very common there in Central Asia, and it says and is the lowest amongst the indigenous peoples of the Americas and Australia. So they're saying that it is very low. B is very low in the Americas and also Australia. And remember, they said that the Australian people, they're supposed to have or be like the oldest people on the planet or have the oldest DNA on the planet. Okay. And so if I find something related to that, I probably will insert that in here, okay? Because we also know that there's a group of people that's in South America, I believe in the Amazon area, that they say that these people are related to the people from Australia, the Aborigines of Australia. But anyways, it says, however, there are relatively high frequency pockets in Africa as well. Okay, now you see what they're saying? They're saying that B is also is it's in high frequency when it comes to Africa. Now, let's look at this map. Now, you see where it's yellow? And it says 0 to 5 for the B blood type. It's barely here throughout the Americas, right? And now we're talking about North America, Central America, even South America. It's barely here, okay, when it comes to the indigenous population here. Now, for the indigenous population in Africa, on the other hand, it's very high over in Africa. But remember what they said in the other article, A, B, and O, which used to be C. They said that O was the oldest blood, and their hypothesis is that it's the oldest blood, and it had originated in South America amongst the Red Indian, and they referred to the Red Indians as being the old race. Okay, so that would make sense why this blood type is barely here throughout the Americas amongst the indigenous people. Okay, now it says blood type A blood allele is somewhat more common around the world than B. About 21% of the people share the A allele, and then the highest frequency of A is found in small unrelated populations, such as the Blackfoot Indians of Montana with 30 to 35%. The Australian Aborigines are about 40 to 53%, and the Lapps and Sami people of northern Scandinavia about 50 to 90%. But remember, they said that A was supposedly originated or associated with European populations, okay? So that would make sense if the Blackfoot Indians, if of 30 or 35% of them, they have A, it's probably because of admixture with the Europeans, probably. Since we already know that O is considered as the blood type of the old race from South America, the South American Indians, the Red Indian of South America. They referred to them as the old race, remember? And they also referred to O as being the oldest blood type as well, in that A and B basically mutated from O. Okay. Anyway, it says the O blood type usually resulting from the absence of both A and B alleles is very common around the world. About 63% of humans share it. Type O is particularly high in frequency amongst the indigenous populations of Central and South America, where it approaches 100%, and it is also relatively high amongst the Australian Aborigines and Western Europe. Now, the reason why I think that it is popular in Western Europe is because a lot of they say the Celtic people, they have that blood type, but I think it also has to do with the fact that they kidnapped a lot of American Indians and they brought them over to Europe to be slaves. And it says the lowest frequency of O is found in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. So basically, the O blood type is barely found in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, where B is common. So if B is younger than O, then that tells you right there throughout the European population, Asiatic population, and also Africa, since Africa is also a part of the Asiatic population, because because a lot of people in Africa actually had migrated from out of Asia, different parts of Asia. So let's see. Now let's look at the Americas. Now you see blue, and blue stands for 90 to 100% of South America. And then you look at Central America, and you look at the western part of the United States, and also, very interesting, southeastern the southeastern area of the South. Okay, so like Florida, that would looks like appears to be Florida, Georgia, Alabama. Which Indians came from there? We know who were mostly there. The Negroes, the people that they call Negroes, the people that they call African Americans. That a lot of our ancestors, the tribes we came from the southeastern woodland peoples. Okay, you see blue right there where Florida look like it is. And then you see it Central America like they said, and look at that. Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Caribbean Isles. And then you see up here, like near Canada, you see it very frequent, okay? It says percent of population that has an O blood type. All right. And then you see up north like Michigan and out east, northeastern area, you see they're saying it's about 70 to 80% of the O blood type in those areas, okay? Now you have to think to yourself, this is the indigenous population in the Americas have the O blood type, and it's very high here, right? It's the highest throughout the Americas, and like they said, in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, it's not really found. Okay, and then we already know in Africa that what's more prevalent there is B, even though they find O there as well, but it's mostly a lot of people in Africa have B blood type, okay? Like they had specified. Now, you clearly see that the indigenous population in the Americas, that their blood type overwhelmingly is O. Okay, now this is from SmithsonianMag.com. A DNA search for the first Americans links Amazon groups to indigenous Australians. The new genetic analysis takes aim at the theory that just one founding group settled the Americas. Okay, then it says Brazil's Surrey people, like the man pictured above, share an ancestry with indigenous Australians. And this was published on July 21st, 2015. It says more than 15,000 years ago, humans began crossing a land bridge called Beringia that connected their native home in Eurasia. So Eurasia, that's what they call Europe and Asia at first, before they decided to make Europe and Asia separate continents on the map. But Eurasia, so that's what that is. So to modern day Alaska, who knows what the journey entailed or what motivated them to leave, but once they arrived, they spread southward across the Americas. It says the prevailing theory is that the first Americans arrived in a single wave, and all Native American populations today descend from this one group of adventurous founders, but now there's a kink in that theory. The latest genetic analyses back up skeletal studies suggesting that some groups in the Amazon share a common ancestor with indigenous Australians and New Guineans. Now, New Guineans, that they're in Asia, but they're like Southeast Asia. And anyway, it says the find hints at the possibility that not one but two groups migrated across these continents to give rise to the first Americans. Our results suggest this working model that we had is not correct. There's another early population that founded modern Native American, or it should be called American Indian population, says study co-author David Rich, a geneticist at Harvard University. The origin of the first Americans has been hotly debated for decades, and the questions of how many migratory groups crossed the land bridge, as well as how people dispersed after the crossing, continued to spark controversy. In 2008, a team studied DNA from a 10,800-year-old poop concluded that a group of ancient humans in Oregon has ancestral ties to modern Native Americans. In 2014, genetic analysis linked a 12,000-year-old skeleton found in an underwater water cave in Mexico to modern Native Americans. Genetic studies have since connected both these ancient and modern humans to ancestral populations in Eurasia, adding to the case that a single migratory surge produced the first human settlers in the Americas. The Aleutian Islanders are a notable exception. They descend from a smaller second influx of Eurasians 6,000 years ago that bear a stronger resemblance to modern populations, and some Canadian tribes that had been linked to a third wave. Rich's group had also previously found genetic evidence for a single founding migration, but while sifting through genomes from cultures in Central and South America, Pontus Coghlan and a researcher in Rich's lab noticed that the Suri and the Cartitina people of the Amazon had stronger ties to the indigenous peoples in Australia, Australians, New Guineans, and the Andaman Islanders than Eurasians. Other analyses haven't looked at Amazonian populations in depth, and genetic samples are hard to come by, so Harvard lab teamed up with researchers in Brazil to collect more samples from Amazonian groups to investigate the matter. Together, they scrutinized the genomes of 30 Native American groups in Central and South America using 4 statistical strategies. They compared the genomes to each other and to those of 197 populations from around the world. The signal persisted. 3 Amazonian groups, the Suri, the Caritiana, and I think it's pronounced the Zalfanti, all have more in common with Australians than any other group in Siberia. And so they show you right here where the people are located. And they're very strong in the area what they would call the country that they would call Brazil, where the Amazon is located. You see that Suri, Caritana, all in South America. Okay, that's where they're at. Okay, it says researchers map similarities in genes. It says the DNA that links these groups had to come from somewhere, because the groups have about as much in common with the Australians as they do with New Guineans. The researchers think that they all share a common ancestor that lived tens of thousands of years ago in Asia, but that doesn't otherwise persist today. One branch of this family tree moved north to Siberia, while the other spread south to New Guinea and Australia. So what they're saying is that they believe it's an ancestor that's related to both the people who came from Siberia and Beringia, and that particular group of people that came from this ancestor. One group went to Siberia, the other group went to Australia and New Guinea. So that's what they're saying. And to me, it seems possible. It seems possible that that could be the case. Okay, and it says the northern branch likely migrated across the land bridge in a separate surge from the Eurasian founders. The researchers have dubbed this hypothetical second group population Y, and the language spoken by the Zuri and the Caritiana is Tupi ancestor. Okay, now this is from SmithsonianMag.com. A DNA search for the first Americans links Australians, and then as you see here, they're trying to do a little hijack here and try to say that the Australian people are from Africa, which doesn't make sense since we already looked at the blood type maps, and we already looked at the medical information about blood types A, B, and O being the most ancient blood type. and how A and B are actually mutations from O, and that the O blood type is associated with the people in South America, which are the South American Red Indians, which they refer to as the old race, which exists in South America. So if the oldest blood type exists in South America, and we also know that people in Australia also have the ancient blood type O, which is common with the South American Red Indian, then that would suggest to me that either the Aborigines of Australia migrated to South America, or they have a common ancestor that had the O blood type. So that's what I'm thinking, because they also found skulls also in South America that look similar in structure to the Aborigines of Australia. Okay, they didn't say that those skulls look similar to the people that came from Africa. They said that they looked like the people that came from Australia, and we already know there's a connection between the Aborigines of the Americas and Australia because of the old blood type that is in the South American Red Indian, which they said is the old race, not a new race, but an old race. Okay, so let's get into it. It says the new DNA analysis shows Aboriginal Australians are the world's oldest society. Okay. And it says for centuries, Aboriginal Australians have said they belong to the oldest sustained civilization on the face of the earth, citing their culture and history of oral storytelling that stretches back tens of thousands of years. Now, one of the most extensive analyses of indigenous Australian DNA to date suggests they've been right all along. The ancestors to modern humans first arose in Africa. See, that's the hijack. That's what Karen Mayo would have said, because if that was the case, if people originated out of Africa, then why wasn't the oldest blood type associated with Africa, and why didn't they say it came from out of Africa? Instead, they said that O, which is the oldest blood type and the first blood type, they said that it's associated with the ancient race, with the old race that comes from out of South America, the South American Red Indian. Okay, so we know that's not the case. We know that the first people didn't come from out of Africa, because if that was the case, the old blood type would have been highest in Africa, but it isn't. It's highest in the Americas and not Africa. Okay, so anyways, it says here, it says older species like Neanderthals and Denisovans made it out first, and the question on being whether the ancestors of modern non-Africans left waves all or at once. Okay, so they're still trying to get people to fit. They're still trying to get people to believe the out of Africa theory, but the out of Africa theory is not true, because if it was true, again, then the oldest blood type, which is O, it would have been more prevalent in Africa. But the blood type that's more prevalent is B, which is a mutation from O. Okay. So, anyways, so they're still trying to go along with that whole motif. So I'm going to skip down. It says these humans eventually made their way to ancient supercontinent, which was eventually split into Australia, New Zealand, and Papua New Guinea by rising tides. While that isolated them genetically from the rest of the world, their culture was strong and vibrant enough to develop new languages and traditions, and they made their way across the continent. This study confirms our beliefs that we have ancient connections to our lands and have been here far longer than anybody else. Ambry Lynch, an indigenous elder from Australia's Goldfields region, says Delvin. While the study appears to seal the deal on the world's oldest society, it raises new questions. The genetic analysis also showed that ancestors of indigenous Australians and Papuans may have mated with previous unknown human species. Of course, they would say that an unknown human species. Who else would it have been? It says just like ancient Europeans inbred with Neanderthal. Though scientists are just now getting hints at who these mysterious human species were, further genetic analysis shed light on another ancient relative. So, in other words, what they're saying is that basically the indigenous Australians that and people from Pompeii, the Pompeians, that they have an ancestor that's in common with each other, and that in this article they try to say that the Australian people came from out of Africa, which to me I doubt. I just think that they're their own distinct group of people, and I don't think they migrated out of Africa. Because again, if that was the case, then why isn't old blood more prevalent in Africa and associated with Africa instead of Australia and South America? See, these are the things that people have to look at. The most ancient blood O is more prevalent in South America, in Central and North America and Australia than it is in Africa, whereas B is more prevalent there. And B is obviously a mutation from O. So with that being said, I'm going to end this video. Like, share, and subscribe. I'm out.